The military transport ship Valiant Dawn docked at Station Nexus with barely a whisper of sound, its advanced human engineering making even the massive vessel's movements seem effortless. Inside the passenger bay, Commander Elena Vasquez sat perfectly still, her small frame dwarfed by the regulation military seat. At 17 standard years, she possessed the bearing of someone who had seen more combat than most career soldiers twice her age. The other passengers, diplomats, traders, and various alien dignitaries, cast curious glances her way. To them, she appeared to be just another human teenager, probably the daughter of some military official being shuttled between stations. They had no idea they were looking at the youngest battlefield commander in recorded galactic history, the architect of the siege of Kepler 442b, and the tactical genius who had broken the Zephyrian blockade of the Outer Rim. Elena's reflection in the viewport showed a face that could have belonged to any human adolescent. Smooth skin unmarked by the scars that typically decorated veteran warriors, bright green eyes that held depths most would never recognize, and auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail rather than the elaborate braids favored by senior military personnel. The only hint of her true nature was the way she held herself, spine straight, shoulders squared, eyes constantly scanning for potential threats even in this supposedly safe civilian transport. The ship's intercom crackled to life with the captain's voice, speaking in galactic standard. All passengers prepare for disembarkation. Station Nexus welcomes you to the heart of the Galactic Council's administrative sector. Please have your identification ready for processing. Elena reached into her jacket and pulled out her credentials. The small card bore the seal of the Terran Defense Force and identified her as Commander E. Vasquez, Tactical Operations Division. She had learned long ago to keep her age off official documents when possible. The number 17 had a way of making even the most open-minded beings question her capabilities. As the passengers began to file out, Elena remained seated until the crowd thinned. She had developed this habit during her years of active service. Always be the last to enter unfamiliar territory. Always maintain the tactical advantage of observation. Through the viewport, she could see Station Nexus stretching out before them like a small city floating in space. The massive structure housed representatives from over 200 different species, making it the most diverse location in the known galaxy. A soft chime indicated that disembarkation was complete for the general passengers. Elena stood and made her way to the exit, where a young ensign waited nervously by the airlock. He couldn't have been much older than she was, but his eyes held the anxious respect of someone meeting a legend. "Commander Vasquez?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm Ensign Torres. I've been assigned as your liaison during your stay on the station." Elena nodded curtly. "Status report, Ensign." Torres straightened, clearly relieved to fall into familiar military protocol. "The Galactic Council has scheduled your presentation for tomorrow at 800 station time. Council members from 47 species are expected to attend, including representatives from the Zephyrian Collective." His voice dropped slightly at the mention of humanity's former enemies. "Opposition expected?" Elena asked, as they walked through the airlock into the station proper. "Unknown, ma'am. There's been discussion about your appointment to the Council's advisory board. Some members question whether humans should have such a prominent voice in military strategy, especially considering my age," Elena finished for him. It wasn't a question. Torres nodded uncomfortably. "Yes, ma'am. Ambassador Chen briefed me that some council members feel the appointment was made more for political reasons than practical ones." Elena almost smiled at that. Political reasons. If only they knew how many nights she had spent hunched over tactical displays, calculating casualty projections and supply line vulnerabilities while her peers were still learning basic algebra. If only they understood that her first command decision had resulted in the salvation of an entire colony world and the lives of 3 million civilians. Station Nexus buzzed with activity as they made their way through the main corridors. The architecture was deliberately neutral, designed to accommodate the vast array of physiological differences among the galaxy's species. High ceilings allowed for the tall, graceful Etherians to move comfortably, while recessed pathways provided easy navigation for the low-slung Malari traders. Environmental controls maintained a careful balance of atmospheric conditions that most carbon-based life forms could tolerate. Elena observed everything with the eye of someone trained to assess tactical situations. Exit points, security measures, crowd patterns, potential choke points, all of it filed away automatically in her mind. It was a habit that had kept her alive through 3 major campaigns and countless smaller engagements. They passed a group of Centaurian diplomats engaged in heated discussion near a holographic display showing current trade route statistics. One of them, a tall being with crystalline features and 4 arms, noticed Elena as they walked by. His compound eyes focused on her with obvious curiosity. "Is that a human juvenile?" he asked his companions in Centaurian, apparently assuming she wouldn't understand the language. Elena had learned Centaurian during her second tour of duty, when human forces had been deployed to assist in defending their mining operations from pirate raids. She kept her expression neutral and continued walking, but made a mental note. First impressions would be crucial tomorrow, and it was clear that many council members would be approaching her with preconceived notions about human youth and military capability. Ensign Torres led her through a series of interconnected corridors toward the diplomatic quarter. The walls here were lined with artwork from dozens of different worlds, abstract sculptures that shifted color in response to movement, paintings that seemed to exist in 4 dimensions, musical sculptures that produced haunting melodies when approached. It was beautiful, Elena admitted to herself, though she couldn't help but notice that much of it could provide excellent cover in a firefight. "Your quarters are in Section C7, Torres explained as they entered a transport tube. "Ambassador Chen requested that you be given accommodations near the human diplomatic mission for security and convenience." The transport tube accelerated smoothly, carrying them through the station's core. Elena watched the blur of lights and movement outside the transparent walls and reflected on how different this was from her usual accommodations. During active campaigns, she had slept in everything from military bunkers to captured enemy installations. The idea of diplomatic quarters with actual windows and climate control felt almost luxurious. "Tell me about the council members I'll be addressing tomorrow," Elena said as the transport began to decelerate. Torres consulted a data pad. "The full list is in your briefing materials, but the key figures include Council Prime Zerath of the Hive Collective, Ambassador Thane representing the Orion Federation, and—" He paused, checking his notes. "General Kothvar of the Zephyrian Military Contingent." Elena's expression didn't change, but internally she felt a familiar stirring of anticipation. Kothvar had been one of the strategic masterminds behind the Zephyrian expansion into human space. She had studied his tactics extensively during the war, learning to predict and counter his moves across multiple star systems. In many ways, he had been her teacher, though they had never met face to face. The transport came to a stop, and they stepped out into a corridor that was noticeably more comfortable for human physiology. The ceiling height was lower, the lighting was warmer, and the air carried the faint scent of Earth flora from carefully maintained atmospheric recycling systems. "Your quarters," Torres announced, stopping before a door marked with both human numerals and galactic standard symbols. He handed her an access card. "Your briefing materials are already loaded on the room's computer system. Is there anything else you need, Commander?" Elena took the card and looked at the young ensign. He was nervous, she realized. Not just about protocol, but about the situation itself. He understood, at least partially, what was at stake tomorrow. The Galactic Council was deciding whether to formally recognize humanity as a military advisory power, which would grant Earth significant influence in interspecies conflicts. Much of that decision would rest on their assessment of Elena herself. "Just one thing, Ensign," she said. "When you report to Ambassador Chen, make it clear that I understand the stakes. I'm not here as a curiosity or a political symbol. I'm here because humans have proven ourselves in combat, and I represent that proof." Torres nodded seriously. "Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure the ambassador understands your position." Elena watched him leave, then entered her quarters. The rooms were spacious by military standards, with a separate sleeping area, a workspace equipped with the latest holographic displays, and even a small recreation area with what appeared to be an entertainment system capable of accessing content from multiple worlds. She set her single piece of luggage on the desk and immediately moved to the computer terminal. The briefing materials Torres had mentioned filled several screens worth of data, detailed profiles of each council member, analysis of current political tensions between various species, and most importantly, records of recent conflicts where human military intervention had been decisive. Elena settled into the chair and began to read. Tomorrow, she would stand before beings who had been conducting interstellar politics and warfare since before humans had developed written language. Many of them would see her as a child playing at adult responsibilities. Her task was to prove that humanity's approach to warfare, flexible, adaptive, and innovative, represented an evolution in military thinking that the galaxy needed. As she read through the files, Elena couldn't help but think about the path that had brought her here. She had been 12 when the Zephyrian Collective first attacked human colonies in the Outer Rim. While most children her age were still playing strategy games for entertainment, she had been analyzing battle reports and proposing alternative tactical solutions during family dinners with her career military parents. Her first official military consultation had come at age 14, when Admiral Foster had requested her assessment of Zephyrian fleet movements near the Kepler system. What had begun as an informal conversation had evolved into a formal advisory position when her predictions about enemy strategy proved accurate. By 15, she was attending tactical planning sessions as a full participant. By 16, she was commanding her own operations. The victory at Kepler 442b had been her masterpiece, a complex, multi-stage operation that had required coordinating forces across 6 different star systems while maintaining the illusion of a standard defensive posture. The Zephyrians had expected a conventional response to their siege tactics. Instead, Elena had given them something that military historians were already calling a perfect example of asymmetric warfare. Now, at 17, she found herself in perhaps the most important battle of her career, and it would be fought with words rather than weapons. She needed to convince the Galactic Council that humanity deserved a permanent voice in military affairs, and that Earth's young but innovative military tradition could contribute to galactic peace. Elena turned off the computer display and moved to the window. Outside, space stretched endlessly in all directions, filled with the lights of distant ships and the faint glow of nearby star systems. Somewhere out there, conflicts were brewing that would require the kind of strategic thinking humans excelled at. Tomorrow, she would argue for humanity's right to help shape the galaxy's military future. She was ready for the challenge. After all, she had been commanding troops since before most beings her age had learned to walk. The fact that others saw her as just another out-of-place teenager would simply be another tactical advantage to exploit. The Galactic Council chamber was an architectural marvel designed to accommodate the diverse needs of 47 different species while maintaining an atmosphere of dignity and authority. Elena entered through the human delegation's entrance, her military dress uniform crisp and perfectly fitted, despite her small stature. The chamber's massive dome stretched overhead, its transparent aluminum construction offering a breathtaking view of the star field beyond. Ambassador Chen met her near the entrance, his expression a careful mixture of confidence and concern. As the senior human diplomatic representative, he understood better than most what Elena's presentation meant for humanity's future in galactic affairs. "Remember," he said quietly as they walked toward the central speaking platform, "they'll be evaluating not just your words, but everything about how you carry yourself. Some of these beings have lived for centuries. They've seen countless young species rise and fall based on their military choices." Elena nodded, her eyes scanning the assembled representatives. The chamber was arranged in concentric circles, with each species delegation positioned according to complex protocols that balanced political influence, historical relationships, and physiological requirements. The Etherians occupied elevated platforms near the dome's apex, their tall, graceful forms silhouetted against the starfield. The Molari delegation sat in specially designed recessed areas that accommodated their low-slung bodies, while the aquatic Hydrians observed from sealed atmospheric tanks. At the chamber's center, Council Prime Zerath of the Hive Collective presided from a complex biomechanical throne that seemed to pulse with its own life. The Hive representative was an impressive sight, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with a chitinous exoskeleton that reflected the chamber's lighting in patterns that indicated deep thought and careful attention. "Honored representatives of the Galactic Council," Zerath's voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic systems, automatically translated into the native languages of each delegation. "We gather today to consider the petition from the Terran Defense Force for permanent advisory status in the Council's Military Strategic Division. Representing humanity's case is Commander Elena Vasquez of Tactical Operations." Elena stepped forward to the speaking platform, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. The silence in the chamber was complete except for the subtle hum of life support systems and the distant whisper of space traffic around the station. "Honored council members," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's systems. "I stand before you not as a representative of humanity's potential, but as evidence of what we have already achieved." A ripple of movement went through the assembled delegations. Elena could see several representatives leaning forward with interest, while others, particularly among the more traditionally minded species, appeared skeptical. From the Zephyrian section, General Kothvar rose to his full, imposing height. The veteran warrior's scarred carapace bore the marks of countless battles, and his reputation as a strategic genius was well known throughout the galaxy. "Council Prime," Kothvar's voice carried the distinctive harmonic undertones of his species. "With respect to our human colleagues, we must question whether this individual truly represents military expertise or merely serves as an emotional appeal to our sympathies." Elena had expected this challenge. She turned to face Kothvar directly, meeting his compound gaze without flinching. "General Kothvar," she said, "I believe you're familiar with the siege of Kepler 442b. You commanded the Zephyrian forces during that engagement." Kothvar's mandibles clicked in what Elena recognized as surprise. "Indeed, that siege was unexpectedly resolved. It was resolved because your standard siege tactics were countered by an asymmetric response that you didn't anticipate. Specifically, the coordinated use of civilian shipping lanes to mask military movements, combined with false supply convoys that drew your forces out of position while the real strike force approached from the system's asteroid belt." The chamber had grown completely silent. Elena could sense the attention of every delegate focused on this exchange. Kothvar's posture shifted slightly. "You seem well informed about classified military operations, Commander." "I should be," Elena replied calmly. "I designed that strategy. I commanded the forces that executed it." and I accepted the surrender of your siege fleet when your position became untenable." A sound like rustling leaves swept through the chamber as delegates from various species expressed surprise in their own ways. Elena saw Kothvar's compound eyes widen slightly, the Zephyrian equivalent of shock. "That is impossible," Kothvar said finally. "The human commander at Kepler 442-2b was one of their most experienced tacticians. The strategy displayed there required decades of military experience and deep understanding of both human and Zephyrian doctrine." Elena reached into her uniform jacket and withdrew a small data crystal. "This contains complete records of the Kepler 442b operation, including tactical communications, strategic planning documents, and post-action analysis. Everything is authenticated with Terran Defense Force encryption. I was 15 years old when I planned that operation, General. I am now 17. She inserted the crystal into the chamber's central data system. Immediately, holographic displays materialized throughout the space, showing tactical maps, troop movements, and communication logs from the siege. Elena watched as delegates studied the information, their expressions ranging from fascination to disbelief. Council Prime Zerath's biomechanical throne pulsed with increased activity as the Hive Collective's leader processed the data. "These records appear authentic. The strategic innovation demonstrated is remarkable." Ambassador Thane of the Orion Federation rose from his delegation's position. The tall, blue-skinned humanoid was known for his analytical approach to galactic politics. "If we accept these records as accurate, we must ask ourselves a crucial question. Is this individual's tactical ability an anomaly, or does it represent something unique about human military development?" Elena seized the opening. Ambassador Thane raises the essential point. Human military doctrine doesn't rely on centuries of rigid tradition or the accumulated wisdom of long-lived species. We adapt, we innovate. We find new solutions to old problems because we don't have the luxury of assuming that what worked yesterday will work tomorrow. She gestured to the tactical displays still floating throughout the chamber. Every major human military victory in the past 5 years has been achieved through asymmetric thinking. At the Battle of Proxima Station, Commander Rodriguez defeated a numerically superior raider fleet by using gravitational anomalies as tactical weapons. During the rescue at Titan 7, Captain Walsh coordinated a successful evacuation under impossible conditions by treating civilian infrastructure as military assets. Elena paused, meeting the gaze of as many delegates as possible. These weren't veteran commanders with decades of experience. Rodriguez was 26. Walsh was 29. I was 15 when I first commanded troops in combat. This isn't coincidence, it's evolution. A new voice entered the discussion from the Centaurian delegation. "You speak of evolution, Commander, but evolution requires survival pressure. What pressure has shaped this supposed human advantage?" Elena smiled slightly, the first emotion she had shown since entering the chamber. "The pressure of being the youngest species in galactic politics. We've been fighting for our survival since the day we left our home system. We don't have the luxury of ancient alliances or inherited territories. Every conflict we've faced has been against opponents with superior numbers, better technology, or centuries more experience." She moved to the center of the platform, her voice gaining strength. "We've had to become tactically innovative because tactical conservatism means extinction. When the Zephyrian Collective invaded our territory, we couldn't match their fleet strength ship for ship. When the Raider confederations attacked our supply lines, we couldn't rely on traditional convoy protection. When natural disasters struck colony worlds, we couldn't wait for proper rescue protocols." The holographic displays shifted, now showing a timeline of human conflicts and their resolutions. Each engagement demonstrated the same pattern: numerical or technological disadvantage overcome through innovative tactics. This is what humanity offers the Galactic Council: Elena continued. Not just another military voice, but a fundamentally different approach to military problems. We don't just ask, how has this been solved before? We ask, how can this be solved differently? General Kothvar had remained standing throughout Elena's presentation, studying the tactical data with obvious professional interest. Now he spoke again, his harmonic voice carrying a note Elena hadn't heard before, respect. Commander Vasquez, he said, in my analysis of the Kepler 442b operation, I concluded that the human commander who defeated my forces possessed an intuitive understanding of space combat that took me 2 centuries to develop. I dismissed the possibility that such insight could exist in a being so young. Kothvar's mandibles clicked in what Elena now recognized as thoughtful consideration. I was wrong. The question before this council is not whether humanity deserves military advisory status. The question is whether the galaxy can afford to ignore the tactical innovations your species continues to develop. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction, but kept her expression neutral. Kothvar's endorsement carried enormous weight in the council's military considerations. His own reputation as a strategic genius made his opinion on tactical matters nearly unassailable. Council Prime Zerath's throne pulsed again, faster now, indicating the rapid processing of multiple data streams. The evidence presented is compelling, however, we must consider long-term implications. If human tactical doctrine continues to evolve at its current rate, how do we ensure interspecies military cooperation remains possible? Elena had anticipated this concern as well. Council Prime, human tactical innovation isn't about abandoning cooperation, it's about expanding the definition of what cooperation can achieve. The victory at Kepler 442b succeeded because human forces coordinated with Centaurian mining vessels, Molari cargo haulers, and even captured Zephyrian equipment. She gestured to the data displays. We don't innovate in isolation. We innovate by finding new ways to combine existing resources, including the military traditions and capabilities of our allies. Human tactical doctrine isn't about replacing other approaches. It's about synthesizing them into something greater than the sum of their parts. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates conferred within their species groups. Elena could hear fragments of conversation in dozens of languages, translated and retranslated through the chamber's systems. The overall tone seemed positive, but she knew that diplomatic momentum could shift quickly. Ambassador Chen approached the platform, his expression cautiously optimistic. The preliminary discussions seem favorable, Commander. Several delegations are expressing strong interest in formal military cooperation agreements. Elena nodded, but her attention remained focused on the chamber's political dynamics. She could see the formation of voting blocks, the careful positioning of delegates who might swing undecided species toward approval or rejection. The real battle was just beginning. Council Prime Zerath raised one of his upper appendages, and the chamber fell silent. The council will now enter formal deliberation on the Terran petition. Commander Vasquez, you have presented humanity's case with remarkable clarity. We will consider all evidence presented today in reaching our decision. Elena bowed slightly toward the Council Prime, then toward each major delegation in turn. Thank you, honored representatives. Whatever your decision, humanity remains committed to galactic peace and cooperation. As she left the speaking platform, Elena caught sight of General Kothvar approaching through the crowd of delegates. The massive Zephyrian warrior moved with surprising grace for his size, and Elena found herself genuinely curious about what he might say in private. Commander, Kothvar said, his harmonic voice pitched for conversation rather than formal address. I would be honored to discuss tactical philosophy with you during your stay on the station. There are aspects of your Kepler strategy that I am still analyzing. Elena extended her hand in the human gesture of respect and greeting. The honor would be mine, General. Perhaps we could learn from each other. As Kothvar carefully shook her much smaller hand, Elena reflected on the unexpected turns this diplomatic mission was taking. She had come to Station Nexus prepared to defend humanity's military capabilities. She hadn't expected to find potential mentorship from former enemies or to discover that the galaxy's military establishment might be more ready for change than she had dared hope. Elena spent the next 18 hours in a state of controlled tension that felt familiar from her combat commands. The Council's deliberation period stretched longer than expected, with reports filtering through the diplomatic channels about heated debates between traditional military powers and more progressive species willing to embrace innovation. She used the time productively, meeting with various delegation representatives who sought private audiences. The conversations ranged from genuine curiosity about human tactical development to thinly veiled attempts to assess whether humanity represented a future threat to established galactic power structures. The most surprising meeting came from the Etherian delegation. The tall, graceful beings were known for their ancient civilization and deep philosophical traditions, making them unlikely candidates for military innovation discussions. Yet High Contemplator Zephys had requested a private audience specifically to discuss Elena's strategic philosophy. They met in one of Station Nexus's meditation gardens, a carefully controlled environment that simulated the atmospheric conditions of multiple homeworlds simultaneously. Elena found the elderly Etherian standing before a holographic representation of a spiral galaxy, her elongated fingers tracing patterns in the light that seemed to follow some mathematical principle Elena couldn't immediately identify. "Commander Vasquez," Zephys said without turning around, her voice carrying the musical quality typical of her species. "Your presentation to the Council was most illuminating. Not for what you said, but for what you revealed about the nature of strategic thinking itself." Elena approached cautiously, unsure of proper protocol for Etherian philosophical discussions. "High Contemplator, I'm not certain I understand." Zephys finally turned, her large dark eyes reflecting depths that spoke of centuries of accumulated wisdom. "Your species has accidentally stumbled upon something that my people have studied for millennia, the principle of emergent complexity. You create strategic solutions that are greater than the sum of their components, but you do so intuitively rather than through systematic study." The Etherian gestured to the galactic hologram. "Watch." The spiral pattern began to shift. Individual star systems moving in what appeared to be random directions. Traditional military thinking assumes that strategic outcomes can be predicted through analysis of individual components, ship capabilities, troop strengths, technological advantages. Elena watched as the seemingly chaotic stellar movements began to resolve into a new pattern, more complex and beautiful than the original spiral. "But you're suggesting that real strategy emerges from the interactions between components, not from the components themselves." "Precisely." Zephys smiled, an expression that transformed her ancient features with surprising warmth. "Your victory at Kepler 442b succeeded because you treated the entire engagement as a complex system rather than a series of individual tactical challenges. You allowed new strategic possibilities to emerge from the interaction of elements that traditional planning would have considered separately." Elena felt a spark of excitement as the implications became clear. "This means that human tactical innovation isn't just about adaptation. It's about recognizing that complex systems can produce solutions that no individual component could achieve alone. Indeed, and more importantly for today's deliberations, it means that your species offers something that cannot be replicated through conventional military expansion or technological advancement. You offer a fundamentally different way of understanding conflict itself." Their conversation was interrupted by Ensign Torres, who approached with obvious reluctance to disturb such an important discussion. "Commander, forgive the interruption, but Council Prime Zerath has requested your presence in the Council chamber. The deliberation period has concluded. Elena felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. She bowed slightly to Zephys. High Contemplator, thank you for this insight. I believe it will prove more valuable than you know. Zephys inclined her head gracefully. The Etherian delegation will be watching today's vote with great interest, Commander. We have not seen such potential for strategic evolution in many centuries. Elena made her way back to the council chamber through corridors that seemed more crowded than before. Word of the impending vote had apparently spread throughout Station Nexus, drawing observers from dozens of species not directly represented in the council. The galaxy's military future was being decided, and everyone wanted to witness the outcome. The chamber itself buzzed with barely contained energy as Elena entered. She could see delegates engaged in last-minute conversations, some nodding with apparent agreement, while others gestured with what appeared to be heated disagreement. Ambassador Chen met her near the human delegations section, his face carefully controlled, but his eyes bright with suppressed anticipation. Any indication of how the vote might go? Elena asked quietly. Chen shook his head slightly. The traditional military powers are split. The Zephyrians and Orion Federation seem to be supporting our petition, but the Draconian Empire and several of the older civilizations are expressing concerns about setting precedents for rapid policy changes. Elena nodded. She had expected opposition from species whose military traditions stretched back millennia. Change was never easy for civilizations that had found success through consistency and proven methods. Council Prime Zerath called the session to order, and the chamber fell into expectant silence. The massive Hive Collective leader's biomechanical throne pulsed with steady rhythms that Elena had learned indicated formal ceremonial modes. Honored delegates, the Council has concluded its deliberation on the Terran petition for permanent military advisory status. This decision was not reached lightly, as it represents a significant shift in how the Galactic Council approaches strategic planning and military cooperation. Elena felt her breath catch as Zerath paused. The silence stretching across the chamber like a held note in some vast musical composition. The petition is approved by a vote of 31 in favor, 14 opposed, with 2 abstentions. The chamber erupted in a mixture of celebration and heated discussion. Elena felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly buckled her knees, but she forced herself to maintain military bearing as delegates from the supporting species began to approach the human section with congratulations. General Koth Var was among the first to reach her, his massive form moving through the crowd with surprising grace. "Commander," he said, his harmonic voice pitched to carry approval. "I look forward to working with human tactical innovation in future engagements. Perhaps we can finally bring some creativity to the galaxy's strategic challenges." Elena shook his offered claw hand, reflecting on how dramatically her relationship with the Zephyrian military had evolved in just 2 days. "General, I believe this is the beginning of a very productive partnership." As the formal celebrations continued around her, Elena found herself thinking about the broader implications of what had just occurred. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented: recognition as a legitimate military power despite being the youngest spacefaring species in the galaxy. But more than that, they had won acceptance for a fundamentally different approach to strategic thinking. High Contemplator Zephys appeared beside her with the fluid grace typical of Etherian movement. "Commander, the Etherian delegation voted in favor of your petition not just because of your tactical innovations, but because of what those innovations represent for the galaxy's future evolution." Elena turned to face the ancient being. "Evolution? Your species demonstrates that strategic wisdom doesn't require centuries of accumulated experience. It requires the ability to see patterns that others miss and the courage to act on those insights. These qualities will become increasingly important as the galaxy faces new challenges that cannot be resolved through traditional approaches. Elena was about to respond when Ambassador Chen appeared at her elbow, his expression urgent despite the ongoing celebration. "Commander, we've just received a priority communication from Earth. There's a situation developing in the Perseus arm that requires immediate attention." Elena felt the familiar surge of focus that always accompanied the transition from diplomacy to active operations. "What kind of situation, Ambassador?" "A first contact scenario that's gone badly wrong. Unknown species, apparently hostile, with technology that doesn't match any known galactic civilization. 3 colony worlds have gone silent in the past week, and Terran Defense Force reconnaissance indicates organized military action rather than natural disaster or accident." Elena's mind immediately began processing tactical possibilities. Unknown technology suggested that traditional galactic military responses might prove inadequate, exactly the kind of situation where human adaptive strategies could prove decisive. "The Council is requesting immediate human military consultation on response options," Chen continued. "It seems your advisory status is about to be put to its first real test." Elena looked around the chamber, where delegates were still engaged in celebration and political discussions about the implications of the vote. None of them yet realized that the galaxy was potentially facing exactly the kind of crisis that had made human tactical innovation necessary in the first place. "Ensign Torres," she called to her liaison, who appeared immediately at her side. "I need a direct communication link to Admiral Foster at Terran Defense Command. Priority override for active operations." As Torres hurried away to establish the connection, Elena turned back to Ambassador Chen. "How quickly can we convene an emergency council session for strategic planning?" "Within 6 hours, if the situation justifies emergency protocols." Elena smiled grimly. "Ambassador, if 3 colony worlds have gone silent to an unknown hostile force, I guarantee the situation justifies emergency protocols." She moved toward the chamber's communication alcoves, her mind already shifting into the tactical planning mode that had carried her through countless crisis situations. Around her, the celebration continued, but Elena was no longer thinking about diplomatic victories or species politics. She was thinking about fleet compositions, supply line vulnerabilities, and the kind of strategic challenges that required exactly the sort of innovative thinking the Council had just voted to embrace. The galaxy's newest military advisor was about to face her first test in the role, and Elena suspected it would prove whether humanity's tactical evolution represented merely an interesting anomaly or the beginning of a new era in galactic strategic thinking. As she reached the communication station, Elena caught her reflection in the polished surface of the control panel. The face looking back at her still belonged to a 17-year-old human female, unmarked by the scars and weathering that typically characterized veteran military commanders. But the eyes held depths that spoke of battles won through innovation and crises resolved through adaptive thinking. She was no longer just another out-of-place teenager being questioned by adults who couldn't understand her capabilities. She was Commander Elena Vasquez, humanity's representative in galactic military affairs, and the galaxy's youngest strategic advisor was about to help determine how an unknown threat would be met. The real test was just beginning, and Elena found herself looking forward to proving that humanity's appointment to the Council's advisory board had been based on merit rather than diplomatic courtesy. After all, she had been commanding troops since before most beings her age had learned to walk, and she had no intention of letting the galaxy down now that they had finally recognized what humans could contribute to their collective security. The communication link to Earth established with a soft chime, and Elena stepped into her new role as the galaxy's youngest and perhaps most innovative military strategist. The universe was about to discover just how far human tactical evolution had progressed, and Elena was ready to show them.